Hello, my friends. Thanks for being here. I'm still on a high this week because a breath of fresh air has just been awarded second place in the fabulous Over 50 Awards out of Florida. We came in runner-up to that well-known author and podcaster, Mel Robbins, so not a bad effort if I do say so myself. Anyway, enough gloating. Let's get on with hearing from our guest today. If I play you this, will you know who it is? Yep, you got it. Sharing the story of his climb to the top is none other than Irish-born Raymond O'Sullivan, better known to most of us these days as Gilbert. As part of a wave of singer-songwriters who followed a path carved out by Paul McCartney and the Bee Gees, Gilbert O'Sullivan doggedly pursued his ambitions despite creating a very unpopular image for himself.
I created a sort of character called Gilbert, based on a kind of Charlie Chaplin. Used to hire a Chaplin jacket from a theatrical costume, putting Basin haircut, which of course is very fashionable now.
Of
But
course.
and long hair was here to stay. So I looked a bit freakish. So none of the record companies I went to liked the image. They liked my songs though. And the thing about image for me was that I didn't mind the playfulness of the image because the serious work was the song. So it meant that with a serious song, serious about writing songs, I could get off on this image thing and then just have fun with it for myself. And so I liked what I wore, but nobody else did.
When did you first decide that music was your love?
I think just the love of radio. Radio introduced us to music and stuff without having to be able to buy records. So radio was the key factor in the beginning. Loved early pop music, late 50s, early 60s. From there on, it just grew as an interest. We all wanted to be in a band after the Beatles came out. And so I had a band, school band, played the drums, then a better band called the Prefects. And then I was the drummer in a band called Rick's Blues. Really good band.
That was with Rick Davies, who later went on to found Supertramp, right?
Absolutely. So, yeah, he ended up joining a band called the Lonely Ones, which became The Joint, and then became Supertramp.
You started writing your own stuff during those years?
Yeah. In fact, in Rick's Blues, we made a couple of demos in London. I was writing, if you like, in the way that Supertramp have Roger, who wrote the commercial songs, and Rick writes the sort of album stuff.
Uh-huh.
A bit like that when we were together. Rick would write the odd tune, but musically he was brilliant. He taught me blues piano, great musician, better drummer than me, of course. But I wrote the kind of commercial type songs. And so that was the beginning of the kind of writing process for me. And it kind of developed from there up to when I was making my own records.
Right. Were your songs already dark then?
Dark.
Yeah.
Why do you say that? Do you think a lot of my songs are dark?
Well, I think that they were sad sort of songs. They weren't happy, poppy, I'm in love type of songs, were they?
Well, I think that my first songs were influenced by the Beatles in terms of writing, influenced by Bob Dylan in terms of voice. They were the catalyst for me. So my early pop songs were pretty much quite youthful songs, a lot about love and no real serious matters. That came up later. I mean, Dylan didn't just write love songs. He wrote songs about the world, events and stuff. So there was an influence there. So I started to incorporate events into my love songs. If I was writing a love song, I'd maybe have a middle eighth that might go off into another area and then come back to what the song was about. I quite like that approach. And I like to include things that are going on in the world in a kind of subtle way, not to be pitchy and upfront and Bono about it or something. So I like that thing of just sticking things in that are going on around you because I'm very influenced by what's going on around us. So I take an interest in that. So it's nice to stick a bit of that into my work. Well, Nothing Rhymed would be a classic example. That was the first success. And the song, at the time that I wrote that, for the first time ever on television, Biafra, starving children were seen. We'd never seen film of starving children before. It just shocked the nation. It's just horrendous to see these children. So that came into Nothing Rhymed and stuff. There's an element in that when I glance at my screen and see real human beings starved to death right in front of my eyes. So that's where I was able to incorporate it as part of the song, but not all about the song.
Were your family on board with what you were doing, or were you being pushed in another direction?
Well, my mother was the musical one in the family in one sense. She had the radio, she had the piano in the house. Working class families always had a piano. They didn't have much money, but there was always a piano. Why? Because if their kids learned to play the piano, they could earn a few bob in the pub late at night. So the piano was in the house. I'm one of 6 children. None of my other brothers or sisters are musically inclined. I had piano lessons, but I didn't last very long. I got found out. I put up the music that I was supposed to be playing, and I played what I thought was on the music,
By
but,
ear.
but it wasn't. So, yeah, and so the teacher said to my mother, "You're wasting your money." I do remember that Irish families get together, they have sing-songs and stuff. I do remember a moment that'll always be important to me privately, is Mum said at one of these sessions with all the Irish people that Raymond writes songs. Oh, and so they all go, "Oh, really?" And yeah, and so Raymond, will you sing them one of your songs? So I sang a song called Disappear, which I really liked. I was happy with the song. Well, there was complete silence at the end of it. They didn't quite know what I was doing and stuff. And it wasn't an Irish song that they remember. So it didn't go down too well. So from that day on, I vowed never, ever to play my songs to a group of people like that. And Mum was good. Again, she made I wanted to look a bit scruffy. I wanted the sleeves of the shirt to be loose. And Mum had to cut the sleeves of the shirt and to get that kind of character that I was creating. I wore the Charlie Chaplin jacket we used to hire from a costumers. Normally you hire them for a show or for a film or for something. When I went in on a weekend to hire the Chaplin jacket, they used to say, "What's the production for that you're doing?" And I said, "It's not a production, it's just for me to stand in front of the mirror and look at it over the weekend." And the nice thing was that when I started to get a little bit of success before major success, and I went into them, they gave me the jacket. So that was nice.
Where had you constructed this image of Gilbert? Where did he come from? What were you trying to get to? Because growing up with you, I thought that's who you were. I thought that's how you dressed.
No, it's to create a character, because I didn't call myself Gilbert O'Sullivan as a singer. I just called myself Gilbert. Like a Just William character, just Gilbert. And so therefore the image to go with that is what I had. One long trouser, one shorter than the other, pudding basin haircut, schoolboy tie and stuff. So the character was good, because you always felt, and Elton John has said this too, and Billy Joel, it's very difficult for us. If we're guitar players, we'd be all over the stage, running from left to right and everything, but pianos, you're stuck. Right. You can't move. You can go like that, you can go like that, you can turn to your left, but so you can't do much. So to have some kind of an image issue, the way I was dressed, I looked really odd, but it was interesting. So there was some interest there. And the catalyst for me anyway on the image front were the Beatles, because the Beatles had the hair, the collarless jackets. So they didn't have to do that to be successful. So I kind of took the image issue and made it something very different. Right. Okay. I had a lot of fun.
Even if the world didn't quite understand it, you enjoyed it. Yeah. So you're sending out demo tapes everywhere and nobody's picking them up. They're all saying that you're looking too weird to accept it. But what happens when you were working at the London department store? Then you fell into a bit of luck, didn't you?
Yeah, I was working in C&A's in the clothes department over Christmas. Because you moved to London, where are you going to live? How are you going to pay for it? My mother couldn't afford for me to pay rent in London. So 3 of us got together. We looked for a job on the day we arrived in London, and we found a basement flat that 3 of us could live in and look for work. And so C&A's had a male clothes area. So I met somebody there who was being offered a recording contract at CBS. So I gave him my little cassette and said, would he take it to them and stuff. And 3 or 4 songs on that cassette. That's the only one I had, because I didn't have a tape recorder. I borrowed it in Swindon to make on my piano in the garden shed those few songs and stuff. But they liked it and stuff. So they were very interested in my songs, but they had no idea about how I wanted to look. So I said, you're not getting my songs if I don't get a recording contract. So they gave me, reluctantly, they gave me a recording contract. Because as I say, the songs always got me through. Because even at the point when Gordon Mills, who managed Tom Jones and then Gilbert Humperdinck, when he got interested in my songs, hearing a tape, he didn't like the image. But he said, you're going to be successful not because of the image, it'll be because of your songs. And I like your songs, because he's an ex-songwriter himself. He co-wrote It's Not Unusual for Tom Jones. Gordon really liked my songs, and he didn't mind. He said, you want to wear that? Be my guest. That was really good for me.
It's interesting that he didn't try to change the image at that point.
Well, if he had wanted that, I would have walked. There's no
Ah,
way I was going to alter the way I want. I was that determined. As the one thing about me is I'm very shy. I'm quite a shy person with people I don't know. But in terms of the music career, I was right there. When the first record producer I worked with, who was very successful, when it looked like we were going to be working anymore, they keep you under contract. That's how they do it. Stuff. So I used to go to the office where the CBS Records where he was and wait there till I could catch him coming out the back door to say, "Let me out of my contract." So that went on for a long time before he eventually got caught by me. And I said, "Please let me go. I'm not making any more records with you. Just give me the break I needed." So that's how I got out. Then moved to another record company, and similar scenario. Got out of that, and then the next one was Gordon Mills, of course. When he got my tape, he saw the pictures and just threw it in the bin because he was this guy with pudding basin haircut and the Charlie Chaplin jacket. He looked stupid. But later in the afternoon, his secretary said he picked out the tape and thought, let's have a listen anyway. And he really liked the songs I sent him. I went to his home. I'd never seen anything like it. It was Disneyland. He had to hear that I could do more than was on the tape. So I played him a few more songs. I hadn't written nothing rhymed or anything at that point, but he really liked my songs. And the interesting thing is when I left that evening to go back to London on the train, because he lived outside London, I missed the last train. So I spent the night on a bench at the station. But I was on a real high, because I knew I was going to be successful.
You were on the precipice, yeah.
It felt really good. It felt really good. I was very happy to spend the night on a bench.
Once you did write Nothing Rhymed, it made the top 10 in the UK in late 1970.
Yeah, big success in Australia too.
I know. We loved you.
Normally you would go there on the first success and stuff, but I didn't do that. I didn't do my first concert until 1972, which is great for me because it meant that I could do the writing, which is the most important thing. The danger of going to Australia in 1970 on the success of Nothing Rhymed, where do you write the next song? Where is the next album coming from? It was good for me to be able to stay at home, maybe go to Europe, Germany, France, Holland, do a TV, come back. So I was writing during that 2-year period. So my first concert was in 1972, and from there on in, it worked out really well.
Gordon was plotting your career all the way, wasn't he? He was managing you every step of it.
Yeah, absolutely. He was a huge influence for me in the very beginning. So he was great because he had the power, to take an image he didn't like and see that, people found the image interesting and stuff. There's no doubt about it. And I dropped it in 1971. I moved on to a sort of G sweater thing and stuff. And yeah, again, I having fun with the image, but the seriousness was
in the music.
Was in the music, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. When you look back at yourself now and see pictures of what you looked like with that sort of street urchin look, are you embarrassed by it?
No, because the street urchin look in my head is now the height of fashion.
So you were just ahead of your time, you think?
So I look very fashionable from the waist up. From the waist up, I look as though I'm as hip as anybody today. So I'm really proud of that. It could have been long hair and high heel boots and stuff, and flare trousers sticking out here, and I would look upon that as horrendous. But no, the image it looks really good.
Decades ahead of your time. Gilbert, what was the writing process like for you? Did you have to lock yourself in a room for hours on end to come up with things, or did stuff sort of drop for you and come really easily? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's discipline, very discipline. It's a Brill building mentality. Have you heard of the Brill building?
Mm.
That's where people like Carole King, Jerry Goffin, Neil Sedaka, Neil Diamond would clock in at 9 o'clock. A building owned by Don Kirshner, famous publisher. Uh-huh. You clock in at 9 o'clock, leave at 5. In the room was a piano. You sat there to write songs. And so I have that attitude to songwriting. So if I need songs short of a melody, the discipline is I'll sit there from 9 to 5 to come up with it. And I've maintained that discipline. When I need to write, rather than haphazardly throw it around and in between this, I'm very, very disciplined in terms of that. And even if after 5 days of sitting at a piano, 9 to 5, nothing really comes, you haven't wasted your time because you are practicing. So, yes, so your fingers are doing something if you're not.
And did you have times where nothing came, or were you always pleasantly surprised that good stuff did come to you?
Not surprised, Sonny. I knew I had it in me. And again, the confidence was there. And I didn't need to let people hear my songs. If I was happy with it, that's it. I didn't need you to say to me, or I didn't need me to say to you, do you like this? And for you to turn around and say, it sounds great. Because when I used to go to publishers' offices, I always noticed I would be in the room with the people at the publishers, and if somebody would come in with a song they'd written and give it to the publisher and say there, what do you think? If they put it on their record player, and they say to the person, yeah, that's really good. Yeah, go away and do some more. As soon as he went out, they turned it and said it was, rubbish. But it's that kind of difference. I don't need you to tell me if it's good. It's self-belief is really important to have that, because you may not be as good as you think you are, but thinking you are is good.
How did you develop that? Had you had that since being a child?
No, I'm very shy in company and stuff. I'm not great at school, didn't really make friends, very much a loner. That came out of just, getting into the craft of songwriting, which I loved and still love to this day. It's just the most important thing to me musically and stuff. And when I write what I think is a good song, that is success, because it has nothing to do when it's released. When it's released and out into the public, you're not in any control of that. So you have to accept that nobody may like it, or if you're lucky, they will like it.
I think that's a really important lesson and really good advice for people to hear, because if you satisfy yourself, it actually doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of you, does it?
Well, I just feel sad for people who need you to tell them if they're good, because if you don't have that self-belief, you'll get washed away in the music. The music business is notorious for the way it treats artists, and better now perhaps than it was in the 50s and 60s. I mean, I was underage when I signed my first CBS publishing contract. Rick Davis of Supertramp, he countersigned it for me, and my mother had to sign it for me. Now, here's the thing. April Music, the publisher, said, we're going to give you a 5-year contract. And here's me naively saying to myself, wow, 5 years. It could have been 3. It could have been 2. If it had been 3, it would have been better than the 5 years it was. Because I called my mother up and said, Mum, I've just got a great publishing agreement. Guess what? It's for 5 years. And it could have been shorter. I said, if it had been 10 years, I might have been even better. But that's a lesson that today wouldn't do you much good. Because now, as you know, with court cases, the way things are established, that you cannot sign an artist now without them having independent advice and stuff. But there were no lawyers assisting us in those days. So 5 years was a long time to be signed.
And did you see much in terms of reward financially from that 5 years?
Well, yeah, of course, because it was 67 to 70, 3 years. During that time, there were cover versions. I did 2 records with CBS and stuff. It's progress forward. They're not successes, but it's a learning craft. You're in a big studio with a producer, and it's your songs, but they're not really turning out the way you would like them until eventually when we get to Nothing Rhymed. So you're into 2 years of the publishing agreement left. When Gordon Mills signed me, right, he had to be sure that I wasn't signed to another company before he would manage me. And the person who was representing me at that time had me signed to quite a long-term agreement, which I'd agreed. And so I knew I had to get out of that before I wrote to Gordon Mills. So I went round to his mother's house late at night, stood at the door, tears in my eyes, and said, please, let Jay, let me out of this contract. If I don't get out of this contract, I'm not going to get anywhere. His mother said, Jay, give this boy back his contract. So I got out of the contract. That's how I did it. Determination, that determined, not shy about anything musical. Really, really confident. I think that's such an important thing to have. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the success you dream of, perhaps, but it's going to help you on the way there.
Such a contradiction to the way you are and everything else in your life.
Well, yeah, because how can you go on stage? I go on stage for 2 hours. I'm very comfortable on stage. I'm only singing my songs. So I'm really very comfortable. If I was singing your song, somebody else's songs, I might panic a little. I'm not comfortable around people. It's just, you never lose shyness. It's where you're born that way.
We get up to 1971 when you finally break through to the American market. You've had a few successes till then, and Gordon's leading you through on your path, and you write this incredible ballad that we all know and love, Alone Again Naturally, which topped the US pop charts. This time you change your image again. You said that you start wearing sweatshirts with the letter G on it, for Gilbert, obviously. Tell us a little bit about that supersonic hit.
That would have been 72, I think, Sandy. Once Gordon Mills signed me, I was able to give up my job. I was a postal clerk earning £10 a week and my bedsit in London. When Gordon Mills signed me up, he had a bungalow in it near his property in Weybridge, in a kind of guarded estate. And so I moved into that, and it was a joy because instead of being a postal clerk and only being able to write on the weekend, I had my piano in my flat, but I must have annoyed the people below and stuff, but they didn't get offended. And so I was able to write full time. I mean, it was luxury for me to have that. And so that was during one of those sessions of writing. It was time for a new single. So Gordon said, "What have you got?" I said, "Well, I've just finished a song called Alone Again Naturally and stuff, which is a ballad. And the other song is Out of the Question, which I think is a good commercial song." Gordon said, "Right, let's go to the studio." So we go to the studio. Everybody liked Alone Again, but they felt Out of the Question, because it was more commercial, should be the next single. And then at the end of the evening, Gordon said, "It may not be as commercial as the other song, but I think it's a better song. So let's go with that." So there you are. So that gets I was happy with the song, happy with both songs. I didn't put one in front of the other. I like both of them for different reasons. Alone Again is a serious song, dealing with about death, suicide, and those are important issues. But I like that aspect of songwriting. I like to get into a subject. I like to get into the character. I like to get into people who are going through those kind of situations. In other words, my attitude to songwriting is that you don't have to experience it to be able to write about it in a serious way. Yeah. An understanding of the subject gets you through what you're writing about. That's the fascinating thing about lyric writing, is that you get into a subject, not to have experiences. I'm not on the heart on the sleeve. Very few of my songs are based on real experience.
So what was this one based on?
Just an understanding of somebody going through those kind of situations.
Well, why did that come to you at the time? Why were you connected to that?
Well, in the same reason that the Matrimony, which is one of my most popular songs, is about going to Gretna Green to get married, not having any family there, just the two of you, not going to a church. I mean, I'm a Catholic. I go to church on a Sunday. But my songwriting on that song had nothing to do with me. It's to do with my scene, a young couple who don't have very much money, want to get married, so they decide to just go off and do it without telling anybody. So I go into those kind of areas. And that's the fascinating thing about lyric writing.
After you'd finished that song and you were going to release that, did you have any inkling how big it would be?
No, and you shouldn't. That's a dangerous thing. Because if you had it, you'd want it every bloody time afterwards. So the key is I knew it was a nice song. But I must tell you that when it was released first in England, it took weeks for it to break through in terms of radio stations beginning to play it. It wasn't an instant success. And in America, when it took off in America, 6 weeks at number one, it came up and went back. It was a small radio station in some part of America because it came out. Weeks went by, and this radio station, it's a classic thing. You hear very often about this.
Yeah.
They played it, and suddenly it boomed all over. Then it becomes their song. It's become America's favorite song of mine, which is I had no idea. Big surprise to me. I mean, success for me was always about where I lived in England, maybe Europe, America. Wow, yeah.
So how did that feel for you?
Well, I was very happy. Not as happy as the record company, but no, I was really. I wasn't looking for that, but of course, I was very happy to get that, and no question about that.
Alone Again Naturally turned out to be Gilbert O'Sullivan's only American number one. It sold 2 million copies, spent 6 weeks at the Summit in the US, and earned him 3 Grammy Award nominations. In 1972, the song was the second best-selling single of the year in America, behind Don McLean's American Pie. You're still with Gordon Mills, and he's guiding you and cashing in on you big time. After that one, you do it again. In late 72, you had a British number one with Clair. Mm-hmm. Which was amazing. You're really in a position in those early 70s where you can't put a foot wrong.
Well, the entry you mentioned Clair. Clair's one of the nicest songs. I wrote Clair as a thank you to Gordon and his wife. Gordon for managing me. his wife for cooking meals for me, because when I lived, come up to, and I babysat for them. I would, Claire would the one that, of the four children, she's the one that would wake up. So they asked me to babysit, because, we go to Ray, he's around, he'll come up. And so I wrote the song as a thank you to them. And Gordon plays the harmonica on the solo, and Claire does the laugh at the end. She's one of those children it's a very affectionate relationship, because kids always get drawn to an adult of some kind. So I was Uncle Ray, and I'm going to marry Uncle Ray and stuff. So, but the sad thing for me, Sonia, and this is something which to this day really kind of hurts me a little, is that I read an article by a famous journalist here, who was meeting a radio presenter on a children's radio program every weekend in England. It's called Children's Choice, something. And he said to this person, he said, I've got this friend of mine, his daughter would love you to play Clair by Gilbert O'Sullivan. She loves that. He said, ooh, can't do that. Wow. No. Grown up with a child, no way. It's a different world. In those days, the innocence of all that. Now it's a serious child abuse, and so it's sad. We do it on stage, of course. People love it and stuff, but to a lot of people, it
has sinister undertones. Yeah, it's a real indictment on the state of the world, isn't it? It's terrible. I hear that it brings Claire to tears when she hears you or sees you play it now as an adult.
Yeah, well, we meet up with her, which is nice after all the falling out with her manager and the family, bad times. But we meet up with her, and we did a concert in London with the radio station in Hyde Park, so 30,000 people and stuff. Yeah. And she came along with her, with my wife and daughters and stuff. And she was on the stage to watch it. And Tara, my daughter, said that, she had tears in her eyes when we played it. So that will always be special for me. So it's
that's lovely. Talking about the falling out with her dad, with Gordon Mills, what happened there? Because you started to become notorious for all the court cases with him, as just as much as you were for all of the fabulous music. What went wrong?
Well, it isn't that difficult, to be honest with you. By mid-70s, things were easing off. Right, we had a hit 74, 75, things are slowing down, right? So I'm still ambitious now. I'm still driven. I want to get more. And I say to Gordon, who produced my records as well as managing me, I said, Rod Stewart's produced by this big American producer. Why don't you let me work with another producer? That can only be benefit both. You're still my manager. And Gordon said, no, if I don't produce, if I don't produce it, nobody's going to do it. I said, please, that's because he said, look, you're rich. Don't worry about things leveling off. You're rich. You got plenty of money. Don't be happy. And I wasn't happy. So I kind of tried as best as I could to get Gordon to change his mind, and he wouldn't change. And he was spending a lot of time out of music because he had his own private zoo, with tigers and gorillas, and he was going on safari a lot and stuff. So I felt he was losing out working together and stuff. Anyway, I made the decision that because of, I knew I had to move despite all the success we had. I thought I had no choice but to do it. And so I met up with him on a weekend, and I said to him that you still won't work with me on if I work with another, but you won't let me do that. He said, if you want another producer, it's over. I said, well, I'm going to do that. So I said, can we shake hands? He said, yeah. And then the one thing I said was that, will you still give me that interest in my songs that you promised me in 1970? That was an agreement which was being given to songwriters, giving them an interest on the publishing side of their song. Right. And he said to me in 1970, look, you're not successful. If you're successful, I'll give it to you. So over the years, in 1972, I would occasionally say, any news on that interest you were going to give me? Oh, don't worry, you're going to get it. A couple of years go by in 76, and I would say, any news on that? And so here we are when we've broken up, and before I leave his house, I say, will you still give me that interest in it? He said, yeah, go into the office, and Bill Smith, the chairman of the company, will sort it out. So with my wife, we go in, because it was the weekend when I went to his home. On the Monday, I go up to the office, and Bill Smith, his head is there. And I said, Gordon said, you're going to give me that. He said, you're not getting anything. You can F off. And so I left the building. I'd never worked with an independent lawyer. So I rang up somebody I knew who now represents me. I said, can you help me get a lawyer? Because I want to fight to get this interest. Yeah. And so I was introduced to lawyers. And what becomes a small issue in my mind becomes a whole can of worms, conflict of interest. that really hurt him because he's managing the artist and he owns the record company. How on earth can he give the artist a good deal? So that hurt him. But none of that need have happened. He need never have been going to court. That court thing should never have. All he had to do was to give me what he promised me.
And just greed got the better of him.
Well, it's just horrible.
How did you travel through that period? I mean, that must have really destroyed you as a person. I can imagine how uncomfortable, how difficult that would have been, because you would have had such a close relationship with him for the previous years. How did that affect you?
Well, a lot, because of his family. I was close to the family. Joe, his wife, they must have had meetings where my name must have been dirt around the dinner table. Because remember, I was a part of the family.
Yeah, you were living on the property.
I was there. So it's so I was really, it was a bad time and stuff. But musically, I could separate that private anxiety I had on how they were feeling about me. I got through it and stuff, and got back to songwriting, got back to the career, found other producers to work with, and so things started to move up again. So I was happy in the end, but it took a long time for it to really pass.
Obviously, you did keep writing music during that time, because you released the Graham Gouldman produced Life and Rhymes in 1982. The Key of G followed in 89. And even though you weren't seeing the same level of success that you'd seen in the early 70s, you started to develop, or continued to develop, a cult audience, particularly in Japan at the time, didn't you?
Well, yeah, but the first record producer I worked with after Gordon was not Graham. Graham was the second album. The first album was CBS. And we had the hit with What's in a Kiss, which was a top 20 hit for us, which is one of my best songs. That was a good way of being able to go into the future. So what you were saying there now.
That you developed this huge cult following, particularly in Japan.
And we did. Well, we had a number one record for about 10 weeks with a song called Tomorrow Today. That was actually written about Gordon. You seem to be wanting everything yesterday. So yeah, that was a massive hit. And Japan, they like my songs, and they tend to use my lyrics the way how they learn English and stuff. So it's really nice. We have a great time in Japan because it's a wonderful place to go, very special.
Gilbert O'Sullivan, by the time 1991 comes around, you're back in court again.
Well, then you have a situation where the album I was recording at that time, a rapper, a famous rapper in America called Biz Markie, he was hugely popular, wanted to use a part of Alone Again on one of his tracks. So I said, as you do, let's hear it, because we're very protective of the song. So when I got it, I didn't like it. And I didn't realize he was a comic rapper. So I said, no, I refused it. But they went ahead and did it anyway. So he went in and used the sample and rapped over it. So what am I going to do? Just say nothing. So I took him to court. I had to go to America to do it. Had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to American lawyers to do it. And when it went into court, I was the first person to go on the stand, and Biz Markie didn't even turn up. But they were assigned to Warner Brothers, massive label. So the judge said to them, if you don't remove this track immediately, I'll have every Warner Brothers record removed. Well, the S hit the fan. And by the time we walked back to the office, it was all over. But who needs that?
So is that how sampling works? That the original artist has to give their permission regardless of any payment offer? The original artist has to agree?
Well, my sampling case set a precedent. It was the first time the sampling had been made officially. People were sampling before, but were getting away with it. From my case onwards, you had to have permission to do the sampling and stuff.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it set a precedent. So there was a positive to come out of it.
Well, you've had enough court experiences now to last you a lifetime. The 90s saw you busy again, and you've got a whole lot of new stuff. Elton John produced the album called Driven.
Driven is the last album I released, which was 2 years ago. Every 2 and a bit years, I release a new album. Before Driven, it was a time called Gilbert O'Sullivan. Both of them charted with me for the first time in 30 years. Both albums charted. So there's an element of people getting back into me as a songwriter. Because you could argue, and I would agree, that what hurt me in the early days when I was in the Image, that if you were a student walking around the campus, you would not want to be walking with my album under your arm. I would have sold more records with my hair longer and wearing jeans, but I decided to do what I wanted to do regardless.
I understand. Did it bother you for that decade or two when you weren't hitting the top of the charts again?
Well, of course, I would have liked to have had more success. Well, I mean, it doesn't prevent me writing. It doesn't. I don't have writer's block. I've never suffered from that. So that, in a way, that gets me through the feeling that I'm not getting. No music magazines would do interviews with me to write about songwriting, which I felt was, why not? For God's sake, I write songs. I've wrote every song I've ever recorded. I wrote. I love songwriting. Why wouldn't you want to talk to me about songwriting? So you can see that would get to me, but not to the extent that when I wrote what I think was a good song, I would sort of jump up in the room and think, I'm really happy with that. And that gets me through those kind of periods.
Perfect. What an absolute delight chatting with you. Thank you so much for...
Brilliant, Sandy. Good to talk to you. Look forward to
Thank
meeting
you.
you. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.